The first element in our model of the consumer is a model of his or her well-being. In particular, we're going to look at a world that is extremely simple, an extreme simplification of reality in which the consumer only cares about two goods. A good X that is going to denote the good of interest, the problem that we are interested on. So for example, if we are looking at the market for cars, X will be denoting how much cars the consumer consumes. And also another good M, which we should think of as all other consumption, a measure of all other consumption. And in particular, if X denotes the units of the good of interest, so it's measuring units that the consumer consumes, in contrast, the good M is going to be measured in dollars, and you should think about it as a composite good that reflects how much is consumed in all other goods and services except for X. Now, in order to make our life easy, and so we don't introduce unnecessary mathematical complications that add little to our economic understanding, we're going to assume that X is greater or equal than 0, so the good of interest cannot be consumed in negative amounts, but that the good M, this measure of all other consumption, can be positive, negative, or equal to 0. In other words, there are no restrictions on its level of consumption. You will see, if this bothers you as we go along, it's really a technical assumption to make our life easy. It's not going to really matter for the economics, for the economic insights. So don't break your head trying to understand whether this makes sense or not at this point. The other critical element of the component of the model of consumer well-being is this experience utility function, and you should think about it as a function that for any level of consumption, X and M, basically tells you what is the level of experience utility, and if you prefer to think about it as experience satisfaction or happiness that the consumer gets from consuming that amount X and M. And it's a function, so different levels of consumption will map to different levels of experience utility according to the function U. Now, one way of thinking about this is that this function U is an inherent property of the consumer that characterizes how much pleasure he gets from different levels of consumption. And as we will see, one of the key facts of the world is that different people have different experience utility functions, and this will have some consequences down the line. Now, in principle, this experience utility function U could be anything, any function that satisfies some plausible economic properties. But one of the tricks that we use in this course to really be able to understand the models in detail without them making the math excessively demanding is to don't consider the problem in its full generality and instead look only at consumers that have a type of utility functions that look like this. The utility over X and M, the level X and M that gets consumed, can be written as a function B of X plus M. We're going to call the function B of X the benefit function for obvious reasons. And we're going to assume that B prima, the derivative of the benefit function with respect to X, is always positive, and that the second derivative is always negative, which means basically that the benefit function is going to look something like this. We have put no restrictions about where B of 0 is. Now, this class of experience utility functions are called quasi-linear utility functions because they are linear in one of the two arguments of the function. We focus on this type of functions because, as you will see over the next few videos, they have remarkably nice properties that make the analysis of even quite sophisticated issues quite simple, and therefore they are ideal for introductory principles of economics. If you go ahead and take more advanced principles of economics, you will study the problem in a lot more generality. You will also have to learn a lot more math. Consider several remarks about the components of the model that we have introduced so far. The first one is that the function b of x has a very nice economic interpretation, which is basically a measure of the willingness to pay in dollars for x units of the good x, of the good of interest. Here is how to see why. It should be obvious to you that since the utility function over the level of consumption is b of x plus m, it is the case that the utility of the bundle in which you get no x but m, and the utility of the bundle in which you get x but you get m minus bx is the same. These two are the same. This is exactly what it means for something to be the willingness to pay for something, which is you are willing to take away bx units of your cash in order to get access for x. That leaves you exactly indifferent. You may find it very natural, and this is the second remark, to think that b of 0, the level of willingness to pay for 0 units, has to be 0. Now, that is natural for many cases, especially for goods in which the zero level of consumption just doesn't do anything for you, good or bad, let's say cars or pizza. But there are goods, as the next quiz that is coming immediately in a second shows, in which b of 0 is different than 0. So don't assume in general that b of 0 equals 0. Remark number 3. One question of great interest in the model is how do additional units of the different goods, either m or x, add to experience utility? So you can ask the question in particular, what is the derivative of u with respect to the good m? And when you take this derivative, you take as given the value of x of the other variable. And it should be easy or obvious to you that the value is 1. Since the utility function is quasilinear and takes this form, every additional unit of m adds 1 unit to utility. It's always the same. So the ability of m to generate utility doesn't go down with the level of m consumed. We can also define what is the marginal utility of the good x. In other words, what is the change in utility generated by additional units of x on the margin. And it should be easy to see, obviously, that this is b prime of x. And this goes down, it is decreasing. By the assumptions of the benefit function, it looks something, for example, like this. So that's an important property of the quasilinear model and of different characteristics of the two goods, which is for sufficient large consumption of x, the marginal benefit is probably, or the marginal utility is probably very small of consuming an additional unit of x, whereas the marginal utility of consuming m stays constant throughout the entire range of consumption. Finally, notice that under the quasilinear assumption, the experience utility of x and m is measured in dollars and has a nice interpretation, which is the following. It's just the total amount of dollars that you would have to receive to be indifferent between consuming x and m and not consuming any x, because this is how much utility you get from the consuming the m units of the composite good. This is how much utility you get in dollars from consuming the x units of x. So if I want to take that out, I have to give you this much of the composite good, remember, measured in dollars, to make you indifferent. So that's the interpretation of u of xm.